Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Now we're going to be moving on to a new story and a new focus of literary devices to help us find meaning. And this time we're going to be talking about symbolism and metaphors, which include similes, and then the genres of allegory and fantasy. So symbols are all over the place, right? They're in our books, sure, but they're in our language, road signs, cell phone screens, clothing, etc., etc. And just about anything can be a symbol, right? So think about something that could be a symbol that you think could be a symbol in any movie or book or short story that you know, or even poetry. And what is it? And what is its significance or deeper meaning? Think of a symbol and tell me about it. Okay, so why these four things together, these two lit devices and these two genres? Well, most successful stories are characterized by compression, this kind of squeezing or crenation, this squeezing of a bunch of meaning into a tiny amount of space, a lot of bang for your buck. That's what these four things can do. Okay? Compression means to and say as much as possible, as briefly as possible. And that gives the maximum effectiveness, right? Therefore, some details and incidents serve a variety of purposes at once because it's been created, right? A symbol is rarely only mean one thing. A metaphor rarely only means one thing. Allegories rarely mean one thing. Fantasy stories rarely mean one thing. They have many, many layered meanings. And you could get so much done in such a little space. Okay, so those are the four compression techniques, all right? And if you do these well, it can increase the emotional force and resonance of a story, but it takes a lot of work on the reader's part. Symbols and metaphors can be A, easy to miss, and B, hard to interpret. But that's the fun part, actually. There's a lot of open possibilities for you to put in your own meaning. There's a lot of right answers. There's definitely wrong answers, but it gives us a lot of room for putting in our own personal subjective experience with a story and adding meaning as if we're co-authors of the book, which I think that's pretty cool. And so let's talk about literary symbols. So some traditional ones, remember it's just symbols are something that means something more than just the surface suggests, right? So like in The Great Gatsby, there's this scene where Jay Gatsby, the protagonist of the story, is waiting for the love of his life that got away to show up to a party. And there's a clock on the mantle of the fireplace, and he's nervous and he knocks it down. And he thinks he broke it, but no, it's already broken. Now that clock, it is a clock, but why would the author put such focus on this broken clock? Well, because it means something. It's not just a clock. I'm sure it's got a whole lot of layers of meaning, and I don't want to give it away for you and ruin the book for you next year, but it's not just a clock, right? And just think about what classically clocks could stand for. So not talking about Gatsby, but like a broken clock could be something's wrong about your past, about how you're stuck in time. There's this book called The Great Gatsby that you guys didn't read that you could have last year, but it's a biggie. It's kind of gone away. Great Expectations. Definitely the broken clock is symbolic of that being the moment where the character Miss Havisham, her whole life falls apart and it is stuck and she cannot move on and she's stuck in the past. She wears her wedding dress nonstop. Her wedding table is not touched because she was left at the altar and she's just kind of a broken human being, right? So it's more than just a clock, right? And symbols don't have to be objects like the clock. They can be people. They could be situations. They could be actions. They could be, anything abstract that you could put up an article, a, an, and the before. But verbs, we could talk about them in a noun way, right? Like running could be a symbol. If you see a character constantly running, right, that could be symbolic. It doesn't have to be a thing. And names can even be, right, symbolic. In fact, that's a classic one. For example, with Remus Lupin here. I'm going to spoil the story if you don't know it, sorry. But Remus Lupin in Harry Potter in book 3? Yes, 3. He is brought in as the professor of dark arts, and I knew what was going to happen to him at some point in the story. Didn't happen until the end of the book series, but I knew that he was going to die from his name. because it had a lot of meaning already loaded into it, not just by allusions, but by other things like the symbolic scars on his face. Like he's a scarred human being. He's broken somehow. His heart is broken. I could tell. So those scars are a clear symbol. But his name, Remus Lupin, told me, A, he's going to be a werewolf. I already knew. Didn't need any other clues. And I knew he was going to die. Why? Because of his name. So Remus is one of the two brothers that were the mythological co-founders of Rome. And they were raised by a she-wolf because they were like abandoned babies, like, they were orphans, and the she-wolf adopts them as if they're young wolf cubs. And there's famous statues of like babies suckling on her. And when they get older, they become great warriors, and they conquer this area and become the founders of what becomes Rome. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, let's look at the names, Remus and Romulus. Well, the brothers get in a fight about who's going to be the leader, and one of them loses. It's Remus, because it's not called Rheme, is it? It's called Rome, named after Romulus. Okay, so already there's that kind of like sad violence, wolf connection, and death. And then Lupin is literally just Latin for wolf, right? Like the scientific name for wolf is Canis lupus, right? Canis is the canid family, like foxes, jackals, dogs, wolves, coyotes, right? And lupus, wolf, right? So there you go. And there you could read more into it than that, I'm sure. Frodo Baggins from Lord of the Rings. If you know that story, Frodo is Old English for wise by experience. And boy, is that true for this character. He starts off as a naive kind of, almost adolescent, like he's 30, but for a hobbit, that's like your age, like 17, 18 kind of a thing, relatively, because they live a long time, hobbits. Anyway, he's a naive young man, and he leaves the Shire and goes on these adventures, and by the end, he's a broken person, and he becomes wise, and he learns a lot, but he's broken, right? As this picture kind of shows, he becomes wise as he moves through the story. And then in the story, Song of Solomon by Nobel Prize author Toni Morrison, she loves to use symbolic nomenclature as well. In fact, this is some pictures of some characters in the story. Milkmen dead, 1 Corinthians dead. This one doesn't include another one named Pontius Pilate. So a lot of Christian allusions, and if you know the stories, you can look at what's the meaning, the symbolism of the names in the Bible. And then I wonder what she's doing with them. She loves to take classic stories and twist them and change them, particularly Greco-Roman mythology in the Bible. And in this one, it's definitely Bible heavy, but it's also got Egyptian Icarus myth in the story. But with the names here, Milkman dead, the dead last name, the way I interpreted it anyway, and I could be wrong here, but when I read the story, this is what I thought. I thought it was about the family being kind of dead inside culturally, that they didn't know who they were, and they're all kind of sad, and all of them have been kind of raised to believe that being black is somehow less than by their own African American patriarchal grandfather, who's the leader of the group. He's the patriarch of the family. He's a doctor and very proud of that. And he seems to have favoritism and seems to really just only love his children and grandchildren that have fairer skin and straighter hair. And so they have, from birth, kind of learned to not love who they actually are. Does that not sound like paper menagerie to you? A little bit here, similar kind of idea. And so I thought that was kind of what she meant by that kind of dead, that they need to find themselves and come alive again, right? Milkman's just kind of a joke. You'd have to read the story to know why his name is Milkman. That's not really his name. 1 Corinthians dead. She's a relative of Milkman. I'm trying to remember if it was a sister or a cousin or not. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read it. But anyway, 1 Corinthians dead. She's ironically named because 1 Corinthians is a Bible verse where the main message is like that the follower, as far as I understand, is that the followers of Jesus are held to a standard of integrity. And it's a speech to try to get the worldly kind of cosmopolitan Corinthians to stop being naughty and doing acts that are more Roman and doing things that Christians would find naughty and not okay. But that's not her. She's definitely worldly, but she's not acting in a Christianly way. So there's that kind of irony. And then what might be Toni Morrison trying to argue through that? Not sure. But it's a symbol for us to kind of dig through. However, I will tell you another one that's interesting. Pontius Pilate is a character who has an infamous name. If you don't know Pontius Pilate, I'll give you a brief explanation. Pontius Pilate was the Roman leader. I forget his exact title, but he's basically like the governor of this area that Jesus was in not Nazareth, but Jerusalem, I believe, and he asked Jesus to stop doing what he's doing, or he's going to have to sentence him to death. That's just the law. He's being a troublemaker, and Jesus said no. So Pontius Pilate's like, well, I guess I got to crucify you. Sorry. And so he's got this infamous name of being like the guy that sentenced Jesus to death. So that's a horrible name, right? To be naming a woman, a little girl after that. And ironically, she is nothing like that. She's a virtuous and noble person. So is Toni Morrison trying to say something about how people judge us and have expectations for us because of some kind of arbitrary factor like our name or our race or our religion or our culture or our ethnicity or whatever, and that people set these expectations up for us, expecting us to be a certain way? And is she trying to get us to go, what? She's nothing like Pontius Pilate. Maybe she's trying to get us to think about our own judgmentalism, right? And to get us to not be so quick to judge and to not set negative expectations for people just because of some single factor about us, right? Not something that we are, right? Something that we do, right? So there you go. There's a bunch of symbolic names for you, okay? Now, those were super obvious, right? Because the names are so crazy. They seem so obvious. But a lot of times symbols aren't. So sometimes it takes some hunting to do, right? Because some demand interpretation. They're right there, like the green light in The Great Gatsby that this is from. Super obvious symbol. But some are ambiguous, which means it's hard to know if they even are a symbol, right? Or they're very quiet. Sometimes they reinforce meaning, right? They're kind of supporting what you can see already in the story, but sometimes they're the big key to the whole story. Like with Lord of the Flies, some people might say that title like kind of carries the meaning. Okay. And so tell me, what is symbolic in the setting or actions in Paper Menagerie or any of the objects even? I don't care. Pick a symbol from Paper Menagerie and tell me in the chat box, was it obvious that it demanded interpretation, or was this a subtle one that took you time to go back and see? And did it reinforce the meaning of the story, or did it carry the meaning of the story? So all in all, what I want you to do is pick something that you think is a symbol in Paper Menagerie and tell me about it. Tell me about how did you come to understand that it was a symbol, and what was the meaning that you saw in it for the story. All right. So now I want to warn you about symbol hunting, though. Okay. It can be a dangerous thing. You got to enter at your own risk. Sometimes it's hard to know what's literal, what's just a clock, and what's a metaphorically a clock or symbolic, right? It's hard to know sometimes. And sometimes if we have too shallow of a read, we could miss symbols, right, that have a significant meaning. But sometimes we could read too deeply into something, like thinking too much about it, and we might see symbols where there are none. So what do you think? Tell me in the box. Is it better to miss a symbol and therefore miss some meaning of the story, or is it worse to pervert the meaning by making something a symbol that's not, like adding to it? Tell me what you think. All right, well, I think both of them are problematic, right? Both of them have issues, but missing's probably worse than adding, in my opinion, though you could totally disagree with me. And I think an argument I would say is adding meaning, I don't think is as bad as missing it. But I guess it depends on the degree of it. I guess it depends. It depends on what you miss and what you add. So I guess it just depends. It's contextual. All right. So I changed my mind on that one. But anyway, you always want to be alert for symbolic meanings, but you should observe these cautions, okay? So one, the story must furnish a clue in the details that it should be taken symbolically. There should be some clues in there. If there are no clues, I would just let it go as being literally that thing or that action, okay? And almost always symbols have some kind of signal, some kind of neon sign going, ooh, 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 this is a symbol, by being emphasized in some way. Like why, like with the clock, when The Great Gatsby, why have this whole scene about him dropping a clock? How boring. It's like such an insignificant thing. That seems like something you could just edit out. There's a reason it's there. Probably a symbol. If something's repeated, like in the Scarlet Letter, you're going to see certain colors of red and things that are red all over the place, right? So you're going to go, I wonder if red, the color red, is a symbol. Or the position, right? Like the fact the clock was like kind of centered there in this kind of moment made it so obviously to be a symbol, right? So emphasis, position, right? Repetition. Without those signals, I would be reluctant to maybe dig in on that one as a symbol, okay? And remember, symbols need to be established and supported by the entire context of the story. If the symbol seems to not help be part of the cohesive, messaging of the story, if it seems to be an outlier, something that doesn't quite fit, maybe it's the wrong puzzle piece and it doesn't really belong in that puzzle box, right? So, and remember, symbolic meaning has multiple layers. The symbolic meaning is within the story, not outside. What does it mean within the story, right? It's not all clocks, that clock, okay? But you also want to connect the meaning to us thematically outside of the book. So there can be meaning within the story, but the outside of the story, though, would be more the universal theme it's trying to help us understand throughout many of the symbols or many of the metaphors or whatever, okay? And to be a symbol, it must suggest a kind of meaning separate from the literal meaning, right? Like a widow does not signify or symbolize widows, right? An old lady in a story does not symbolize old ladies. No, it's got to be something different, right? It's not some tautological A equals A thing. That's not a symbol, okay? As I said, an old lady's not a symbol of old ladies, right? For example, there's this story called Mrs. Brill, where an old lady is supposed to that's got this fur coat, or not a full coat. It's like a fox or a mink stole that she has, which is kind of like a scarf made out of a fur of a dead animal. It's an old-fashioned story, old-fashioned thing to do. Before we had the ability to make fake fur, and alternatives to warm clothing. Anyway, and it's a Russian story too. I think it's by Chekhov. Pretty sure. I could be wrong. Might be another Russian. But anyway, in the story Mrs. Brill, the old lady is supposed to be a representation of more than that, about someone no longer being wanted, about not being important anymore, about being over the hill and losing your purpose in life, right? There's something more to it than just that, right? It's not enough to qualify as a symbol if it's just a representation. Like this old lady as a stand-in for old ladies, sure, but that's more characterization. That's not really a symbol, okay? And symbols, have multiple meanings. A cluster, it's like a faceted jewel, right? It's got all these little cuts. It can mean so many things, but it can't mean anything. If it could mean anything, then it means nothing. Like if you've ever seen what's that Pixar movie with Dash, The Incredibles, right? When he comes home from the principal's office for getting into trouble for leaving a tack on his teacher's seat. His mom's saying, everybody's special. And he goes, that means nobody is. Same kind of a thing, right? If a symbol can mean anything, then it's meaningless. It's empty. It's not special. It's definitely got some wrong answers in there, okay? It would lose its value if it could mean anything. So, tell me, what's a danger in hunting for symbols? All right, so now moving on to allegory and metaphor. So like symbolism, both require the reader to interpret what the author is trying to say, to imply through them. And that can be confusing, right? It takes a lot of work on the reader. It can be difficult to figure that out, but that's the fun part. That's what I love, is trying to figure out what does this mean, right? It builds the curiosity, and for me, it helps make a story really neat. I love to argue about that stuff, okay? So let's talk about metaphors first. Metaphor is a sentence or a short segment or phrase that equates two seemingly unrelated things in order to argue some point or to show some truth. And yes, similes are metaphors. Not all similes are metaphors, but not all metaphors are similes, okay? And so remember, metaphors and similes, they do have some essence where they converge in some way. There's some overlap, but you have to figure out what that essence is to try to find the meaning, right? It takes thinking, right? And metaphors can be humorous, they can be witty, right? And remember, as I said, similes are also metaphors. That's just they're a little easier to find because they have the phrase like or as, right? I'm as hungry as a horse. So like, okay, so you're comparing your hunger to a horse's hunger, and a horse is, of course, a much bigger animal, and they seem to eat nonstop, right? So I must be very hungry. So it's trying to compare the feeling that I'm having, okay? Something like that, although that's also a cliche. All right, so here's an example of a series of metaphors meant to be both witty and humorous. It's a poem called Litany by Billy Collins. So let's listen to him read it for us, and then I'm going to have you guys try to tell me what one of the metaphors might mean that you caught. Okay, here we go.
When I take the first two lines of someone else's poem and rewrite it for them, which is, this is done out of courtesy to, when you see a poem that doesn't seem to get, that seems to fail, you can just rewrite it and improve upon it that way. So this is I came across this love poem in a magazine, and it's a series of comparisons in which the poet relies on a very ancient device in Western love poetry, at least dating back to the Middle Ages, which is to compare the beloved to various things in the world, and therefore, by flattering her, so your eyes are like stars and whatnot, you make headway. And so his poem really is a wheel-spinning exercise in these kinds of comparisons, about 40 lines of just the same stuff. You're like, this, you are this and that. So he begins by saying to the beloved, he says, "You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine." Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh birds suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is no way you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife, not to mention the crystal goblet and somehow the wine.
Okay, so if you can't tell, Billy Collins is a very beloved, humorous poet who was the poet laureate of the United States during the second Bush administration.
When I take...
Okay, so here's the poem, okay? In the chat box, tell me, just look for any metaphor in here and tell me what you think it might mean. You can't be wrong. Every line's a metaphor. Okay, pick one and tell me what you think he might be trying to say by comparing his beloved and himself to these different things. Okay? All right. So now moving on to allegory, okay? Metaphors, similes, and symbols are all literary devices, but allegory and fantasy are different genres that tend to use those a lot. Okay, so let's talk about allegory of the genre, which we did a little already with Plato's Cave, right? So an allegory is a complete narrative, a complete story that seems to be about one thing, but it's actually about something else, like Animal Farm. It seems to be about a fight in a barnyard where animals kind of start acting like people. But oh no, no, it's something else. It's definitely a satirical allegory warning about, dictatorships and, communism as an issue during the Red Scare. Last century, right? So it's got a whole lot going on in there. Many, many meanings in there. And allegories, they endow a cluster of characters, objects, and events with added significance. What does that mean? That means everything is a symbol or metaphor. Everything, pretty much. I mean, there might be something that isn't, but just about, right? It would be hard to be wrong about, that's a metaphor or a symbol. Yep, probably. Okay. So it seems to just be this huge collection of many, many, many metaphors and symbols that are trying to say that are literally a story, but there's also something else going on. Okay. And often a pattern relates to each literal item to a corresponding abstract idea or moral principle. Okay, so each of the animals in Animal Farm correspond to historical figures or archetypes that were very politically significant at the time that it was written. And you could even look at it today under a new lens and find parallels between characters in the story and characters today if you know anything about global politics, right? Sorry, just global politics. So when I teach juniors, I tend to love to do this one, The Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne, the guy that wrote Scarlet Letter. This one is definitely an allegory. It's short. I like to do it during Halloween when I have juniors. And so if I have you as juniors, I don't want to ruin it, but everything means something. The fact that his name is Goodman, right? He's a good man. Or is he? Right? And I'm going to just give you a clue. Nathaniel Hawthorne's has a lot of inherited guilt about the crimes of the puritanical colonizers of New England and the Salem witch trials and stuff, and all the witch scares and the witch trials. He was related. It's like his great grandfather or something was one of the judges of the Salem witch trials, whose last name was Hawthorne, though spelled differently, but he spelled it differently on purpose because he doesn't want to be associated with them. For killing all those people, right? So, in any case, now allegory is different from just a symbol or a metaphor. Those are smaller and focused, right? In a story. This is where, as I said, everything, the whole story as a whole has a double meaning. So each object does, but so does the whole story have multiple meanings, at least a double meaning, okay? And it's often critical of something about a certain society or a group of people or human beings as a whole, or it gives an example to us to warn us as how not to live, right? And it tends to be subversive. Now, what does subversive mean? Subversive means tending or intending to overthrow, destroy, or undermine some established or existing system, especially a legally constituted government or set of beliefs. So allegories tend to be subversive, trying to get you to question your beliefs, question your reality, question your government, question what you think is true or something, or question what you think about yourself. So they're being very witty in trying to get you to, very often tend to be subversive and highly critical, just like satire can be. Okay, just like Scarlet Letter can be seen as one, just like Plato's Ring of Gyges that we did, and Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Those are all allegorical stories trying to get us to understand and make us question things, right? Question what we think is true, real, good, any of that kind of stuff. Okay, so be aware of authors' use of description and detail. It may be more than just giving you sensory details of imagery. It might be something way more, okay? Look to see if it suggests some kind of deeper meaning as the story of a whole. It could either be a morally second kind of story, some intellectually challenging thematic point, some emotional point it's trying to make, right? So, or it could be all three at the same time, right? So, and allegories usually aren't too obvious. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're like, okay, not everything means something else, but sometimes it is right on its face, right? Like I would say Young Goodman Brown's pretty on the surface. But, Animal Farm for sure. But the one you're going to read maybe isn't so obvious, so I'm just going to tell you it's an allegory. Half a day is one, okay? But it shouldn't be too easy or simplistic to interpret. A half a day is not, but that's why it's fun. We can sit there and dig through it together and try to figure out what the heck is this about. And that is what gives you the intellectual joy, the intellectual high to kind of go through it and try to be like, what is this about? And then we have that awesome conversation where here are other people's possible interpretations. And then it's like, I don't know about you, but it gives me huge dopamine bursts to be able to figure it out for myself. Okay. It's less powerful if it's too obvious and easy. So we shouldn't want it to be that easy, right? It should take some work from the reader. And here's some examples of some allegorical art as a series. This was a series. I forget the name's artist. I feel so bad. I will add it as a comment right now. All right. Anyway, this artist from China is definitely making an allegorical comment about maybe his government of his country of China, and his society that he's living in. Okay, so this is a Chinese artist taking photographs of Chinese people, and I want you to look at it and tell me what you think is going on here. And if you know anything about the Republic of China, their government, it might be easier for you. But just see, even if you don't, it doesn't matter. I bet you can find something in here. So let's look at some of this artistic photography from China, and notice the details. Notice, like, not just the setting, but how he's arranged the characters and what he's doing to them. Okay, so let's look at a few and try to figure out his kind of photographic story allegory. That's The Bird's Nest by Ai Weiwei. I know that artist's name off the top of my head. He's an amazing artist. All right, so tell me in the box, what do you think maybe, what might this allegory be trying to say about the Chinese experience? Or anything else. It could be saying something else too, especially this last one. Okay, so how might you be able to tell the difference between a story that merely has a bunch of symbols in it and it being an allegory? What do you think? All right, so moving on to the last section here, fantasy. Again, it's a genre, right? It's not a lit device. It wouldn't be a how, but it's something to give you a clue to help you look for metaphors and symbols, and as a piece, the piece as a whole, how it can create a lot of meaning. So fantasy, what is it? It's a non-realistic story that transcends the bounds of known reality, like The Dark Crystal. And it's where you must have a willing suspension of disbelief. Remember that we talked about in the last Ed puzzle about how you have to kind of just let it go. Of course, that's a puppet. The Gelflings aren't real. But if you just let yourself get immersed into it, then you can kind of see the truth that is in it. It should have a fidelity to reality, and at least the feelings and the experiences and the emotional conflicts and the tragedies, right? Fidelity means true to life, truth, right? So this fidelity to realities, in fact, it is not needed for verisimilitude, right? It doesn't have to be like reality to have a truth about our reality in a subjective sense inside. Remember, verisimilitude means lifelike, right? So fantasy can still tell us a lot of truths, communicate deeper truths through these imagined facts, these imagined worlds. In fact, it's some of the most powerful way to tell us a lot about ourselves, because when we're inside our own bubbles, we can't see the bubble. but we use fantasy to be parallels, extended metaphors for us. And then we are able to be more critical and see our truth because we feel like that isn't who we are. That's not us. But they're like, wait, and it can kind of wake you up and see some truths about ourselves by showing us, because it's much easier to look from the outside than to look from the inside. So it's a pretty amazing thing to do. And we will read some fantasy stuff, okay? And fantasy includes magical realism, which, guess what? Paper Menagerie is an example of magical realism. Fantasy also includes, which magical realism means it's unclear if the magic in the story is real or not. Most of the things seem normal and real, but there aren't animated magical origami, right? That's just not a thing. Fables can be that. Ghost stories could be that. Science fiction is included as a type of fantasy. It's a what-if story, right, that plays with the presumptions to illustrate some facet of the human condition. So it helps us see again because we're from the outside. And there's a power to the fantasy genre. These improbable initial situations may yield as much truth as probable ones, maybe even more. It has, in some ways, right? At least it helps us see him better. It has the audience question our own truth. Is this how we actually are? Are we messed up like this? Or, do we have this beauty in us? It puts, as I said, it puts us on the outside as visitors to see ourselves in a new perspective, right? And that distance allows a clearer judgment, or at least an ability to see new truths that we're too blind to from the inside. Okay, so now that we're done with that, this is your homework. I want you to read the story, or classwork, both. I want you to read the story Half a Day by Naguib Mahfouz. I hope I'm saying that right. I believe I am. He is I believe he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He is from Egypt, 20th century Egyptian writer. Yeah, he won the Nobel Prize. Wonderful writer. And this story is so good. And what I want you guys to do, and at first you might be like, what? What is this about? Okay, that's okay. We're going to have a lot of fun digging together and figuring it out. Do not worry. Okay, you're not getting tested on, ooh, I found the meaning. Don't worry. We're going to figure it out together, okay? I just want you to try on your own for the first time now. I want you to create 3 ARNs on the symbolism and the metaphors, and the thing as a whole as an allegory. It's not science fiction fantasy. It's not fantasy, okay? It's the other one, okay? As I said, it is an allegory, but don't use allegory as one of your hows. You can talk about allegory in your why, but you want to be using metaphors, similes, right? Because remember, similes are metaphors. For your house, for your lit devices, okay? Because that's a genre, all right? Okay, so I hope you enjoy the story, and I can't wait to hear what you guys see. Bye-bye.